There are 10 members of the Strawhat Pirates, and all 10 crew members have faced some tragic experiences in the past. So in this video, I'm ranking each of the Strawhats' worst moment from 10 to 1, 1 being the worst. Before we get started with number 10, I want to go ahead and throw a couple honorable mentions out there. These are people that aren't Strawhats. Starting with Trafalgar Law, his backstory is absolutely brutal. I mean, he gets infected with this disease that has no cure, so the government burns his entire city alive. That's World War II Germany level crimes right there. Law manages to escape the town by hiding himself in a pile of dead bodies, so he's still alive, but now he's a kid with an incurable disease, no parents, friends, or anybody to rely on. He finally finds a friend in Rosinante. Rosinante goes above and beyond to get the Ope Ope no Mi to save Law's life, and as soon as things start to look good, Rosinante is then killed by Doflamingo, leaving Law all alone in the world once again. I mean, wow, it just doesn't get much worse than that. The last honorable mention is Kuma. This guy's backstory is just so depressing, and I'm not sure if it'll all be animated by the time this video comes out, so I'm not going to go into complete detail because I know not everyone watching reads the manga, but even pre-time skip, you see what this guy's going through. He was basically forced to give his body to the world government so they could make the pacifistas. With the last little bit of self that he had, he saved the Strawhats from Kizaru in Sabaody, and then protected the Thousand Sunny while they were gone. But post-time skip, we learn he's now a slave in Marie Joie. Luckily, he was saved by the Revolutionary Army, but he's nowhere near his former self. He's just basically a shell of what he once was. So you have all that already, and then in Egghead we learn more about his backstory as well as his daughter Jewelry Bonnie. Kuma definitely deserves an honorable mention in this video because his backstory is just tragic. But now it's time to get into the Strawhats, and like I said, we're ranking them 10 to 1. So the Strawhat with the least tragic moment is Jinbei. I don't know why I'm cheering. This isn't a happy video. Alright, Jinbei is number 10 on the list, mainly because we don't know much about him compared to all the others, and it's tough to pinpoint exactly what would be his most tragic moment. We don't know a ton of information about his life as a child. He was an orphan. Maybe you could say the death of Fisher Tiger, his captain, is his saddest moment, but I think there's one other thing definitely up there too. If you don't remember, when Jinbei became one of the 7 warlords, he freed Arlong from Impel Down, and because he did that, it allowed Arlong to go to the East Blue and terrorized Kokoyashi village for 8 years. When Jinbei learned about this information in Fishman Island, I think he heavily regretted his decision to let Arlong out of prison, and that still weighs on his heart to this day. So that and the death of Fisher Tiger are probably his most tragic moments that we've seen so far, and compared to the other Straw Hats, it's just not as traumatizing as some of the others that we have coming up, and for that reason, Jinbei is number 10. Next up at number 9, it might be a little bit controversial, not gonna lie, but I'm gonna put Zoro here at the 9th spot. He hasn't had that many bad and tragic things happen to him. Immediately you think about his backstory, which he did lose his best friend Kawina. Her death definitely hit Zoro pretty hard, but it wasn't as bad as it could be in my opinion. It's not like they were raided by pirates and Kawina died trying to protect everyone or something. As far as we know, she just fell down some stairs. Personally, I think Zoro losing to Mihawk at the Baratier is his most tragic moment. He confidently challenged the world's strongest swordsman and got completely embarrassed by a butter knife. That's one way to kill a guy's pride right there, and then just a couple months later, he shows up at Mihawk's doorstep and has to bow to him and practically beg him to train him. That little combo involving Mihawk, I think, is more tragic than Kawina, and that's why Zoro's number 9, because other people on this list lost a lot more than their pride. So now at number 8, I put Frankie. Frankie might be the only person that you can argue Zoro could be above. They went through similar things, but overall, Frankie's experience was more traumatic. His moment is kind of a culmination of his backstory because it all kind of ties together a little bit. As a kid, he enjoyed building ships that he called Battle Frankie, and when the world government was trying to arrest the shipwright Tom, who built the Oro Jackson, Spondum used the Battle Frankies against a government ship to assure that Tom got convicted and sent to prison. Because of that guilt that Frankie felt because of his Battle Frankies pretty much being the reason Tom got killed, it drove him to try and stop the sea train and gave Frankie serious injuries, and is what led him to become a cyborg like he is today. So that's why he's number 8. I think it's pretty justified to put Frankie right there. His inventions got his father figure killed, and his guilt drove him to almost commit suicide on those train tracks. So pretty intense. Next up is number 7, and I think now is when it gets really hard to rank some of these moments because they're all just really messed up things. So trying to justify some being worse than all the others just doesn't feel right, but that's the point of the video, so we gotta rank them. So at number 7, I put Chopper. Chopper's most tragic moment is for sure Dr. Hero Look's death. Similar to Tom and Frankie, Dr. Hero Look was Chopper's father figure who took him in when no one else would. After Chopper ate the Hito Hito no Mi, he had no one in the world he could call a friend. All the humans tried to shoot shoot him, and the other reindeer kicked him out of their group. So Dr. Herolook was Chopper's saving grace pretty much. Unfortunately, Dr. Herolook was terminally ill, and Chopper was determined to save him, so he goes on this big adventure to find this mushroom that cures all diseases, or so he thought. However, the mushroom was actually poisonous. Dr. Herolook, being the good guy he is, ate it anyway to make Chopper feel better, so Chopper kinda inadvertently killed the only person that was nice to him. Pretty gut-wrenching, and that's something that you're definitely gonna be distraught over for a long time, so I think 7th is a good spot for Chopper. At number 6, I'm gonna put Usopp. I think it's a great spot for him. It's right in the middle of the pack, and the moment I've chosen for Usopp isn't his backstory. His backstory is a little bit sad. His dad leaves him to become a pirate, and then he loses his mom at a young age, making him an orphan. That's obviously not good, but I think the Water 7 arc overall had him more emotionally unstable, at least from what we're able to see. We don't get a deep dive into his backstory like some other characters. In Water 7, a lot happens to Usopp. First, he's tasked with taking care of the money for their new ship. He gets beat up by the Frankie family, loses all the money, and he's terrified of telling the crew because he doesn't want to let them down. On top of this, he learns that his baby, the Going Merry, can't be fixed. She had been damaged too much from their previous travels and just had suffered too much overall damage. So he's in this whirlwind of emotion, and it leads him to getting pretty angry. He feels like he's the only one fighting to keep the Going Merry, and that everyone else is ready to throw her to the trash. That wasn't true, but that's how Usopp felt. That leads to the most infamous part of Water 7, Usopp leaving the crew and challenging Luffy to a duel. In brain rot terms, Usopp crashed out. So he seemingly lost all of his friends that are like his family at this point, and he's in a bad mental state. Thankfully, it all ends well. After Enies Lobby, he apologizes and gets to rejoin the crew. Everybody's happy. So considering it's kind of a happy ending, I think 6th is okay for him. So that brings me to number 5, where I'm gonna put Luffy. Luffy's most tragic moment has to be Marineford. Not just Marineford itself, but him losing his brother Ace during the battle. We saw how this affected Luffy. He nearly died from the injuries and the trauma that he suffered. Jinbei also saved him from despair and reminded him that he still has his crew to live for. The reason I put Luffy at 5 is because I think the next 4 are just more sad. I don't know how to put it. Like I said, this is kind of hard to rank, and Luffy's above everyone else that we've mentioned so far because he went through so much with Ace. He escaped the biggest prison in the world, even got him off of the execution platform, and was about to reach the finish line, and then got stopped right before he could cross it. I know for a fact a lot of you watching disagree with me right now because I posted a poll on my account a couple weeks ago and you voted Luffy losing Ace as the most tragic moment compared to some other Straw Hats. Luffy's reaction to losing Ace is the worst when compared to every other Straw Hat's respective tragic moment, but also when you compare the reactions, Luffy's is kind of an overreaction. Or you could say everyone else is an underreaction. It goes both ways. Overall, Luffy's 5th. I think he's good at 5th. I think the top 4 deserve their spot above him. So now in the top 4 we have Nami, Robin, Sanji, and Brook left, and this is where it really gets tough. These 4 went through a lot, but also went through a lot of different things, which makes it hard to rank them. But at number 4, I'm gonna put Nami. I think a lot of people forget exactly what Nami went through. You think back on it and you're like, oh yeah, she worked under Arlong. No, she was enslaved by Arlong for 8 years and forced to draw maps. She had no personal possessions other than her dream to free Kokoyashi village. On top of that, Arlong is also her mother's killer, and Nami is forced to obey his every wish and command. Another thing to remember, for the entire 8 years she had no friends. Everyone in Kokoyashi village hated her because they thought she betrayed them to willingly work under Arlong, when in fact she was secretly trying to save them and put herself under all this pressure to do so. Nami went through 8 years of trauma, the majority of it her preteen and teenage years, and she's never gonna get those years back. We all saw it. She was chained and locked in a room, forced to draw maps until her hands bled. She was Arlong's slave. I think Nami is well deserved of this 4 spot, and I wouldn't argue with you if you thought she deserved to be higher on this list, because what she went through was absolutely terrible. That wraps up Nami. I did make an entire video on my channel over a year ago deep diving into Arlong and what makes the Arlong Park arc so good. So if you're interested in that, I'll leave a link in the description. We're down to the final 3, and if you've been keeping track, you know we have Brook, Sanji, and Robin left. They all have arguments to be number 1, but there's no ties in my rankings. That's why number 3 is Sanji. Sanji went through a lot in his past, there's no doubt about that. He suffered severe abuse as a child, both mentally and physically, mostly from his father and his 3 brothers. He also went through the death of his mother, the person he looked up to most in his life. There's not really any part of Sanji's childhood that's good until he runs away, which you can't say very often. And that's definitely part of the reason why he's number 3. I mean, they did lock him in a dungeon with a steel helmet on his head. That's pretty cruel. I also want to mention Sanji leaving the crew and fighting Luffy, because all that ties back to his traumatic childhood. I can't imagine the amount of mental stress and confusion Sanji was going through during Whole Cake Island. I think everything combined gets him this high on this list, and I'm not even that big of a Sanji fan, so you can't say I'm putting him at 3 because of bias. He just had a god-awful childhood, and that's what got him here. Only 2 Straw Hats left, and I'm going to keep them short and sweet because people talk about their tragic moments all the time, so you already know all the details. But at number 2 is Robin. She has to be either 1 or 2 on anybody's list. If you don't have her there, your list is invalid. Don't even make the list at that point if she's not 1 or 2. Robin was an orphan essentially her entire life. Her mom was always away with work, she didn't know her dad, and she had no friends because all the other children thought she was a freak. To make matters worse, her home island is Buster called. It gets completely decimated and burned to the ground. Also, her one friend she made as a child, Jaguar D. Saul, gets killed, or at least she thinks he gets killed. So with nothing left to call home, she's forced to be on the run her entire life. At 6 years old, she has a massive bounty on her head, so Robin could never trust anybody she ever met. I mean, think about that. She had to have the most extreme trust issues out of anybody ever. Anybody she met since she was 6 years old could have been secretly plotting to give her to the government. It's sad and tragic. That's all I can really describe it as, and that's why she's number 2. Of course, this leaves Brook at number 1. I think he should be number 1 because of everything he went through with his old crew. He watched all of his closest friends die one by one, and he couldn't do anything about it. He just had to sit there and watch. That's gotta be one of the worst things imaginable. I also put Brook at 1 because he was then alone for 50 years. 99% of you watching this video haven't even been alive for 50 years. I haven't even been alive for half of that. So let alone be completely isolated and by yourself for 50 years. That's more than enough time to make a person go completely insane. And honestly, I'm surprised we never saw Brook go through like a phase where he has issues and has to adjust to being around people again, because realistically you would have some severe trauma being alone for 50 years. Because of that sheer magnitude of 50 years alone, Brook is number 1 for me. And that wraps up the video. If you enjoyed this one, drop a like, and I'll see you next time.